group. So welcome to the New York Information Security Meetup / the Cyber Guild. It's Tuesday, September 22nd, noontime Eastern time, and I have the great pleasure to introduce Todd Carroll, who's the Chief Information Security Officer for a company called Cybel. Who is well, I'm going to let you, CybelAngel, I'm going to let you provide some insight in terms of what you guys do. But first and foremost, welcome. And, we'll have a bunch of questions kind of scripted, but, the idea is to have, people join in and ask some questions. So first of all, welcome to the group. And I would love to hear a bit about your background. You have a fascinating background coming from the FBI. Which always, when I hear like FBI, I was like, woo, it's amazing. Like, there's all kinds of, we see the TV shows and so on, but maybe we'll touch upon that a bit later. But welcome.
Great. Thank you, David. I appreciate you giving me this opportunity, and looking forward to discussing whatever comes up today, answering any questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we walk through, your kind of a background, how did you get to, to become the CISO for CybelAngel?
Yeah, so it is an interesting story because for my background, I was actually started as a police officer back in the early 90s in Oakland, California. Back really early 90s, right after the earthquake, actually, is when I was out there for many years. And then I joined the FBI in 1998. With a background as a detective and doing a lot of criminal work, the Bureau in their infinite wisdom sent me to work counterterrorism.
But hold on, Todd, is this common? I mean, I know that the FBI recruits from various different areas, but how does one get even accepted to the FBI? Do you just get like somebody knocks on your door? Do they send you a form saying, hey, do you want to join? I mean, it's always a bit of a mystery. Can people apply if they wanted to?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Actually, that's where we take the FBI takes most of their recruits. There's two different ways to get in the FBI as an agent, and actually only about a third of all the employees that work for the FBI are armed agents. 2/3 of them are in maybe intelligence analysts, support roles. It's kind of its own unique community, with each field office. Like I was in Chicago for such a long time. We even have our own mechanics that work on our own cars. So you can be many different roles within the FBI. So either you can come up through the ranks, maybe as an intelligence analyst or as a surveillance specialist, or if you want to be, you want to go right into the agent's roles, which I did. I applied. It took almost 2 years. Wow. As interesting as I took the recruiting test, the recruiter said, listen, I've been a recruiter for almost 10 years. I'm getting close to retirement, and I've only sent less than a dozen police officers to the academy. So majority of people, and in my academy class of about 38 back in 1998, there was only 6 of us with any law enforcement background. Majority of people the FBI wants have some other type of specialty skills or life experience, whether it's speaking foreign languages, CPAs, pilots. And we had doctors. We even had a NASA engineer. So we had a rocket scientist in our class. So which I thought was pretty cool because it's not rocket science. I love that term, but
it makes you wonder what does the FBI need a rocket scientist?
Well, it's life experience. He ended up, I followed his career. Actually, I think he believed he's still in the FBI, and he ended up working a lot of more technical terms. And as the FBI developed their cyber program, he went into that side of the house. It's interesting as a lot of the cases can be very complex, especially on the white collar side. Having people that have worked in those areas make it much clearer to be able to explain and understand when someone's talking to you. Can you imagine, like when we send agents or to go in to talk to a company about a complex intrusion, and you have to know what you're looking for, right? And one of the things that we always used to ask for in the day was, hey, let's see your logs, your intrusion logs, and see what's there. And if you've never read one before or had familiarity, it makes it very difficult. It's just not anybody in the bureau should be able to do a bank robbery case. Former bureau people would be like, who used to probably specialize in those, they'd be saying like, no, it's a special skill. It is. Talking to people is definitely a specialized skill, but when it comes to certain things, having that familiarity and have done it as a job really makes it easier to investigate the cases.
So there was a 2-year process of getting accepted. That sounds lengthy,
Yeah, it is. Actually, it's usually more around 9 months, but mine went a little bit longer, mainly because the recruiter, the office I went through, didn't necessarily send a lot of police officers. So I was very persistent, and I went through the process, which included started with a written test, and the second part is also a in person. At least back then, it was a written exercise, and then a panel interview for an hour where they have seasoned agents talking to you about different scenarios, and tell me about a time that you had this, whether it's conflict, externally or internally, or ethical questions. And it was a process. And then after that, there's the physical part, there's the medical, there is then the exhaustive, background where you gave up all your information, which later the Chinese, took from us during the OPM breach. So that was awesome. But, that was back then, I believe that document was somewhere between 30 and 40 pages long of data about your life that you basically give up. And they sent investigators around. And at the time, I was, let's say I've been married about 4 years, but they still wanted to know my ex-girlfriend's name, and they still went and talked to them. So that was,
wow.
Yeah. So they're very in depth about, who what and what kind of character you are.
And it's something they do across the board, right? It doesn't really matter what is, once you're in, they do the same type of. So it wasn't because you had a specific role. It just, that's, across the board, a kind of a standard that they follow, right? This extensive background check.
With a background check, and then I had a background check when I was with the military. I held a clearance, but as you work, in the bureau, and especially going into national security, and you have a higher security clearance, the more in depth of a background you get. You get polygraphed more, to make sure and maintain those clearances.
And then you had, went through the academy, right? How long is that process of getting trained?
The academy back in '98, I believe, was around 18 weeks or so. Its length, I believe it's longer now. I believe it's way over 20 weeks. But yeah, you spend that whole time at Quantico, Virginia, and the academy, and they expose you to everything. I called it kind of like college with guns, as you do firearms, and but it's a lot of class work. It's a lot of practicals. It's a lot of interaction with the staff there to make sure that you're ready to go when you hit the road.
And then what happens then? Do you get to choose what type of role you're getting, or is it just they throw you into whatever there's a need?
So one of the interesting things that it happens at the academy in the first, I believe it's about week 3 or 6. They have bid night. Basically, as you get there in your first 2 weeks, they give you a list of all 56 field offices, and you get to rank all of them, like 1 to 56. Like, I really don't want to go here. I really want to go there. And then they do this entertaining thing where they bring in all the instructors, and it's in the evening, and they have a map of the country and all the field offices, and they call the first person up, and they give you your envelope, and you say, well, I'm Todd Carroll. I'm from Chicago. I'd love to go back to Chicago, and I really don't want to go to Newark, let's say. Particularly, that's what I said. I didn't want to go to Newark. So apologize for anybody out there in Newark. I've been there now. I love Newark. So anyways, and then you open it up and you get to say what you got. And then it's you list it, and the person that has the lowest number, like like unfortunately, the first person that opened theirs up, they said, from Los Angeles, I want to go back to Los Angeles. I don't want to go to New York. That was the last on the list. They got New York. So they won the pool of money, let's put it that way, for that everybody threw in for whoever got the lowest bid assignment.
Oh,
right.
I see. So
Yeah.
it's swinging the pot, basically.
Yeah.
Swinging the blow.
So I wanted Chicago. If I didn't get Chicago, I wanted to go out west. Being a police officer in Oakland, I wanted to go to San Francisco or Dallas, Denver. And I got my 26th pick, which was Washington field office. So I ended up moving to Washington, D.C. And then down the road, sometime in the academy, you're notified by your office what you'll be working. Now, with my background as I worked a lot of violent crime in Oakland, a lot of drug cases. I figured I'm going to go violent crime. I get sent to the National Security Branch to work counterterrorism. Not only that, but back then we had a squad there called squad in New York, D.C., Miami, and in Honolulu that worked extraterritorial terrorism cases. So anytime an American was killed overseas due to an act of terrorism, that's what those squads would go out and do, and that's the squad I got sent to. And they figured, I guess, somewhere in someone's infinite wisdom was, I investigated a lot of violent crime before, so I might as well do it overseas at that point. So I spent about my first 4 to 5 years doing that, from 98 through 9/11, investigating or doing counterterrorism cases.
So did you have to travel overseas? Did you have to? Okay, extensively. Okay.
Extensively, yes. Spent a lot of time, especially WFO covered most of Europe, Africa. But one of the major cases I worked on was actually a case that happened when I was a freshman in high school in 1982, involving a bombing of a Pan American flight that was actually landing in Honolulu, where a device went off and killed a Japanese teenager. We were able to, during the 20-year investigation, find out who it was. Not only that, but was able to find him in the world and bring him to justice. And I ended up the main case agent when he eventually pled, and I got to spend a year interviewing him, which was very interesting, about all his connections, about why he did it, other people in his organization, other open cases that we had, and develop intelligence out of that.
Wow, that's amazing. So you were, I'm sure it feels good to be on a kind of a closing end of something this big. It took so long to investigate and so on. And what happens then? Like, do you have like this case? Is like in the movies, like where they say, okay, case closed, and like there's a stamp on it, like resolved, or do you move on to, or maybe the fact that you interview that person opens up other Pandora boxes around, because I'm assuming that he was connected, or he or she were connected to other organizations as well, right?
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I have worked on cases where, yes, at the end of the day, you put closed on it, successful, and literally put it back on the shelf. But a case like that was so large, and part of his plea agreement was that he had to basically provide us with as much intelligence as we could handle, as we wanted to talk to him about. And part of it was, it had to be to our satisfaction. So I had rotated out to our rapid deployment logistics unit down at Quantico as part of the critical incident response group. So actually, another case agent took over the case and saw it through the closing parts of that case, and then also that intelligence led to other cases, which actually fed into others. So it's very interesting. I'm sure there's aspects of that case that are probably still there's open-ended, because I know there's actually open fugitives still on that case. The bomb maker itself, we were tracking through Iraq during the war, actually, and trying to capture him and bring him to justice also.
Yeah, and and counterterrorism sounds so, to the majority of the population, sounds so vague, but yet it's like everyone's responsibility to to inform, or you always say, you see something, say something. how big is and I know it's a kind of a really open-ended question, but how big is the threat to us as U.S. citizens, and then how are things have changed in the past 5 to 10 years, and then maybe also like I'm assuming that even the COVID-19 has an impact on this, the situational awareness that the U.S. has for events overseas. It seems like there's a lot of unrest and so on. So I know kind of a lot of questions in one,
Yeah.
but just maybe kind of your 20,000-foot overview as somebody who spends so much time in the forces in the FBI.
So let me put it this way: back in the prior to 9/11, and 9/11 was such a game changer with the way it impacted our lives here in the U.S. Right, we did not have many terrorist attacks, prior to 9/11, or they were small, or people really didn't think of them as, I look at that original case I worked on from 1982, that was, a bombing case. Actually, that group, 15 May was the name of that terrorist group. What they tried to do on one day was take down 2 Pan Am aircraft, one over the Pacific, one over the Atlantic, with American passengers, but those were both going to be en route to the U.S. But really, in 9/11, that was our first really impact where we had, on our own soil that we saw that. So the FBI before that was very good at reactive, right? Something would happen in the world. A bomb would go off. We were very good at reporting or responding to that, putting the pieces together, and bringing someone to justice. After that, the FBI changed its mindset, its mission completely, also took on additional intelligence roles and saying, no, this is not, we have to not allow this to happen. We need to be more aggressive. We need to use the tools available to make sure that these things in the U.S., don't have that impact. So the FBI took a bigger role, put more resources into the counterterrorism division. And, unfortunately, we've had those attacks, not to the level of 9/11 on our soil, but we've had those incidents happen. The FBI, working with other agencies, have gotten better at doing it. Over the years. So, as that progresses into the other things that the FBI does, but also I think as Americans, what we would looked at, how is that an impact? And it's interesting if you explain for those who are, you remember air travel prior to 9/11, or even prior to the, mid 90s, when you could go to the gate and there wasn't the restrictions. And, I tell my kids, oh yeah, we used to be able to smoke on aircraft. And you look at that now, you'd light a cigarette and have a lighter on a aircraft at 30,000 feet. It seems, I guess, crazy to them, but that's the way it used to be. And we adapt, and we've adapted. And that's what I tell my kids also. I have 2 daughters who are in college right now. They're both away at university. Both their universities are open, and but they're testing regularly. And as they're going through this COVID situation, I look back at 9/11, and as I was in Washington D.C. and responded to the Pentagon. And I thought as I was working 12-hour shifts and thinking about the impact, and I was working counterterrorism cases, how is this going to impact us as our lives? And are we going to be able to adapt to that? Which we did. We adapted to the way we air travel, right? Yes, it's a pain to go through and deal with TSA and everything like that. But I think as the public, majority of people are like, okay, they feel better about this happening. Same thing with COVID. Yes, we have to wear masks. We're doing this. We're getting through this. And that's kind of what I try to explain to my daughters. Like, listen, we got through that. We're going to get through this. And maybe several years from now, the new norm, I hate that phrase, but that's the only thing I can think of right now is what will change and will help us through this.
Yeah, completely agree. I think we're eventually, just like air travel changed, it will change again. It is changing right now. So how much of that is, on the counterintelligence side and the, counterterrorism, like how much is that some of the focus on cyber?
Yeah.
Because they're saying that the next attack is not necessarily going to be physical attack. It's going to be, like a cyber attack on some infrastructure.
Absolutely. We thought that actually for a long time, at least when I was with the Bureau still. So that kind of progressed as I ended up transferring into Chicago back in 2004. In 2006, I took over the cyber program, and this kind of feeds into this is, Chicago is the fourth largest field office out of the 56, right? Back then, we had one cyber squad.
Wow.
I remember starting my first day and as the supervisor, and everybody was really young on the squad, probably less than 4 years. There was no really senior, and that was fine because I wanted people that had done cyber and had cyber experience outside, because nothing was worse than getting a brand new agent who, somebody in DC goes, well, we'll send them to the cyber squad in Chicago because they're an engineer. And the guy shows up and he's like, well, I was a civil engineer. I type with 2 fingers. And I'm like, okay, so now I have to teach them to be a new agent, but I also have to teach them how to investigate complex cyber investigations. But, one of the first things I said, okay, what's the majority of cases we're getting? And back in 06, most of the phone calls we get is because people didn't get their packages. They got ripped off, in like online shopping. I'm like, okay, wait a second. I don't think this is necessarily what the Bureau needs to be doing. Fast forward, I spent the next 6 years inside the cyber program in Chicago helping develop. And by the end of those 6 years, we worked complex, cyber intrusions involving nation states, involving, bad actors, involving complex criminal networks that weren't just, and kind of left the other stuff, I wouldn't say behind, but for others, and taught locals how to do those cases and those other things. So the Bureau really in, mid 2000s and then on progressed with the cyber program, using, I won't say other agencies, but, the laws that are existing out there, which haven't changed very much. Still, what's the number one thing that most people get charged with in cyber crimes is wire fraud, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is the book since, 60, 70 years now. So
Still.
Yes, still, because it's the easiest one to prove. Well, interstate transfer of, it went over interstate lines through some type of wire communication. All right, internet, done. There you go. Because some of the other stuff are more complex. So, and as we developed, also judges developed, and the U.S. Attorney's Office had to also, because you can imagine you may have an agent that can really speak and understand this complex intrusion into a, let's say, a corporate network, but then you have to make sure the judge understands it. And the judge may have been someone sitting on the bench for 20 to 30 years. And really, and you have to be able to prove your case in front of them. So there was a learning curve, not only with the Bureau, but with the justice system involving U.S. attorneys, because they have to be able to prosecute these cases, and also for judges to understand.
Now, and as a person responsible for the FBI field office for cybersecurity specifically, how much collaboration was it with the enterprise? And at what stage do they call the FBI, and if at all? Because I know the FBI was big into promoting that collaboration, right?
Right.
But there's always these kind of, I guess, some of these enterprises were reluctant to call an FBI just due to the fact that potentially that opens up a almost like a bigger case.
Yeah. So I spent so much time in Chicago at different levels as a supervisor, as an assistant special agent in charge, and then as a deputy in charge of the set number 2 in the office by the time I left. I really promoted that relationship building. And you can have things coming out of DC and collaborative groups like DSAC or ISAC, and then those other ones. But still, at the end of the day, it comes down to personal relationships a lot of times, where people feel more comfortable. So we realized, that if we didn't have a prior relationship with a company or talk to them prior, and they didn't have a warm fuzzy with you, right? That the chance they're going to call you during an intrusion, unless they are mandated by by something else, is almost zero, right? And then we used to always, depending on how many lawyers were in the room, depending on their level of cooperation sometimes, and But part of it is also to break that mystique of like, what exactly is the FBI going to do if we call them and they show up, especially when it comes to a cyber case, you know? Or are they just going to, you know, the old joke was, you know, we're going to show up, you know, raid jackets on, rip all your servers out, and, you know, leave your receipt, and then, you know, basically collapse your company for the next, you know, year.
And that never happened?
No, I never did it. No, no. No, in fact, most of the time it was underwhelming. They're like, "This is it, just you and, you know, 2 other guys." I'm like, "Yeah, we're gonna have a conversation. Like, what happened? You know, what can we do to, you know, assist you? This is what we would need. This is what we'd like to do, and go from there." And that is, you know, that's normally on a criminal case, and it's, you know, I remember the days when, especially when the early Chinese intrusion sets were out there, and, you know, we were picking them up, and sometimes we would notify companies and like, "Hey, can we come sit down and talk to you? You know, we think you have an issue." And what it was they had like an unpatched server, and usually it was something that they were unaware of. It was even sitting on their network still. And we go out and inform them of that, and then say, "Hey, by the way, also, we'd love to, you know, we don't want to monitor what you're doing on that, even if the server's live. We just want to monitor the traffic that's going through there, because that's what they would use. That they use a lot of jump points to attack other networks or whatever it may be." And, you know, that conversation was always difficult. Sometimes it was successful, and other times, you know, companies were like, "Oh my God, I can't," you know, not us. But that was always, you know, an interesting time during that. But it was also very interesting back then. It was much easier than it is now to be able to look at, you know, within the first few hours, if not days, and say, okay, this is a national security issue. This is probably the Chinese, Russians, et cetera, versus, you know, a criminal organization. Today, you know, by the time I got out of the game and left the FBI, you know, a year and a half ago, much, much more difficult, as, you know, everyone wants to look like everybody else, and they're using the same type of techniques and attack vectors that, you know, nation states are.
Yeah, that's so interesting, because we don't necessarily, you know, the only time we hear something about China, it's not necessarily about, you know, cyber or Russia. Or, you know, recently we heard that Russia came out with a vaccine, but I was like, I don't know if I'm going to inject myself with a Russian, you know, vaccine for the COVID. I'll wait until somebody else does first. But listen, so you spend so much time in kind of law enforcement, the FBI. Was the transition to quote unquote civilian life difficult? Like, I mean, now you're a CISO for a vendor, right? So maybe you can talk about a bit about that role. But your experience you're tremendous. I mean, you come out with an amazing background to obviously analyze and have that situational awareness and view of things. So how does that in particular help you in that particular role, and how was that transition for you?
I think working with a lot of corporate entities, especially in the Chicago area and from DC, I think it helped me understand the landscape of companies and what they need, what they want, what their concern was, what their pain points were. And I think that helped a lot developing relationships in Chicago with companies and helping them out, whether it was with training or talking to their C-suite about, you know, what's the real threat here, but also understanding how they operate, and not in the eyes of the FBI, but also then them understanding what exactly the FBI does, how we can help, what other resources are out there. So interesting, you know, I was fortunate when I joined at the right age, so that when I was eligible for retirement, I was at the right age with the right amount of years. So then I had time. I had plenty of years to say, okay, I'm going to go look for a position. I spent a lot of time inside the FBI, furthering my education when it came to cyber work, through, you know, attaining my master's, going to CISO, having some opportunities to go to like Carnegie Mellon CISO Academy, which was great to also develop rapport with others and see what they're concerned with. But then looking at what do I want to do when I leave the bureau, and I really wanted to. I didn't want to go back to pure law enforcement. To be honest, I wanted to take it, see what I could do in the world when it came to cybersecurity. So I was all over the board. To be honest, I applied for a lot of different jobs. and for the first 6 months, and was some interviews I would come out of, to be honest, I was like, wow, I hope I don't hear back from that company, because sounds really uninteresting. And then I got a call one evening from a trusted contact, because it's all about, making those contacts and people that know you and you trust. And he's said, listen, I'm dealt with this company called CybelAngel. They just moved to the U.S. They're Paris-based. They've been around for about 6 years at that time, and they're looking for someone to help them grow in the U.S. And I said, okay, what's a CybelAngel and what do they do? And from there, we started having discussions. And to be honest, what really turned me on as I got to learn the company and the people in it was, for me, two things. It was one, I spent a lot of time developing my reputation and my background, so I wanted to protect that. So I really wanted to understand fully what I was getting myself into. Especially, I didn't expect to go to the vendor side. To be honest, that was the side I did not want to. I don't want to go to the vendor side. I don't want to sell anything. I don't want to be involved in sales. I'm going to get dragged into everything. But to be honest, it was the tech that really kind of won me over, along with the ability to learn. Right, so I'm in my 50s, not a ton of business background, and listen, I could go run teams for, major corporations, and I didn't feel like I wanted to do that. What I felt like I wanted to do is I needed to learn, and this allowed me the opportunity to learn the business side. But also, like I said, the tech was probably first and foremost was, hey, listen, this works. This is something that is powerful, and it's just not something that is unique. I had never seen anything like that before, and that company won me over at the end of the day.
So, to reveal the mystery, what does CybelAngel do? And maybe because you're leaning towards it, So what attracted to it?
I don't mean to be salesy, so if I'm coming.
No, for sure.
Believe me. But no, what CybelAngel does is it basically looks for data out in the wild, right? So it looks for companies based on their keywords, has the ability to scan the whole internet and those areas where data is stored, data is shared, and access to that data. And the ability to do that, to be honest, it's more of a big data solution, because he has the ability to scan and look at billions of documents that are out there open, whether it's through certain protocols, because they're not secured properly, or it's through NAS drives, or it's because, unsecured databases or cloud storage areas that are just not secured properly. CybelAngel, using those keywords, can see all that through its scans, and then can take those billions of documents and then get it down to a usable amount by rejecting over 99% of it, where our analysts then look at it and then provide actual actionable alerts to our clients. Not a huge dashboard where they have to go through. We actually provide and say, listen, your data is with a third party or a vendor, or hey, you have an employee working from home who has an unsecured NAS drive sitting hooked up, and they're exposing these documents that probably should not be exposed to the world right now.
And it's a big problem. I'm assuming that Coke probably has the Coke recipe secured, or recipes. Apparently, it's more than one. Right. But what type of data is out there? I'm assuming IP. It can be anything, really. So right. They're looking for anything specific.
Well, I mean, yes. Everybody doesn't want to be the next, Marriott or whatever. Pick your large data breach of the day, right? That's out there. No one wants to be that. No one wants to be their information that's out there. What we normally find is over 93+% of data exposed is actually by third parties. It's not within the network. So we're looking at things blindly. So we don't want to know who their third parties are. We don't know who their vendors are. We don't want to even know their IP ranges, because we're putting our keywords in and we're looking across the internet and these other open areas. But we find anything from, PII, PHI, CAD drawings, a lot of CAD drawings. Think about what you share in your business with third parties, or not necessarily what you share as a CISO, but what your business units are sharing with their vendors to do their jobs, right? Whether it's a shipping company that's, you know, sharing all the information that is out there on the shipping manifest that may be, you know, or showing price points, or they're doing a merger and acquisition, might be a multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar deal. And, you know, that information is sensitive to a point that it becomes not. But those are the type of information we find. We find a lot of employee data floating around. We see a lot of network schematics. We find a lot of passwords associated with not only credentials, but, you know, testing areas, or which your coders or engineers are doing out there trying to figure out, you know, what's going on. You know, they're oversharing. A lot of it is just on the negligent side. People don't mean to do it, but imagine, you know, I remember back, you know, when I was first getting into cyber, and we go to a company and it was like, okay, show me your servers. And there was these, you know, 3 or 4 guys that knew everything, right? And they're like, okay, we're the ones that put all the server together and all the company data is sitting here. Now we've kind of taken all that away, right? Everything's in the cloud, and we've given the ability for an employee to go down to Best Buy and buy a several terabyte drive, and they plug it in, and now we're asking them to secure. You know, think about how easy it is to misconfigure your Google, you know, when you're sharing a document. Well, do I click that or not that? Well, you click the wrong thing. You really just open it up to basically about anyone. And there's no reminder saying, oh, hey, are you sure you want to do this? You know, do you know you're completely oversharing? And that's kind of what, you know, a gap that we fill is those security things that, with the technology that has grown and we've put more information, the ability to store and share information into our employees' hands, that information is now being unfortunately exposed. You know.
And I'm assuming even more so now with COVID-19 and work from home. Now, you know, there's even less of perimeter in terms of everyone has you know, access to materials that outside of the organization. So, what would you say, like the top, you know, 3 things, like in terms of best practice, like that you can recommend for an enterprise or a company to make sure that they're not kind of the next, you know, data breach?
Boy.
Where to begin?
Yeah, where to begin? Okay. You know, here's the thing: is that identifying. You know, we used to say this. You know, identifying what really can hurt you that's out there. Correct. You're not gonna be able to stop everything. So, you know, do you know where your data is? Unfortunately, it's being shared outside your network and kind of outside of control. So, you know, your typical you know, tools that may be out there. One, I would challenge your vendors, right, that you've had for a long time, to what are they doing to help you with everything that's sitting outside your network, right? Ask them that. Is it just a typical vendors you've always had? Well, I've had this company for, you know, 5 years now, 10 years. But what are they doing to help challenge as things move outside your network? Your perimeter's pretty much, you know, gone. Encryption is always, right? That's the best thing. If it's encrypted, if it's open or not, they still got to. It's another key to do that. You know, in lieu of that, is somebody in your organization assigned to and looking for your vendor security? Are they looking at what the vendor's doing with your information? What are their, you know, it's a trust but verify model, right? You can trust, you know, they signed a contract and say, yes, I have these cybersecurity, you know, rules and regulations, policies, procedures, whatever it may be, and we are going to secure your data. Trust me, right? Now, how do you verify that? And that can be very difficult, right? You know, there's a lot of companies out there that look at and give you, oh, okay, here's your vendor and here's their score, how safe they are. We take that to a little different level at CybelAngel, where we actually don't really want to know who your vendors are, because hopefully if they're not securing it, we're going to tell you who your vendors are, or we're going to tell you this person who maybe used to work for a vendor who now works for someone else scraped all that information down and now has it on a drive that is fully exposed. And that's what we find sometimes.
Yeah, so that's kind of the sound advice. So what happens when, let's say, CybelAngel finds data somewhere out there, and it's not necessarily belongs to anybody, or is put on some shared drive that it's hard, very difficult to take down or access. What do you help your customers to go out there and see how they can mitigate that data? Remove it?
The information we provide during our alerts is contains all the information you would hopefully need to know to at least get started, right? IP addresses, port numbers, the protocol, when we saw it, when's the last time we saw it, is it still open, is it not? Because sometimes what we can detect is, when someone's plugging in a backup drive, right? We see it come on, 4 months later, we see it pop in again. It may be under a different IP address, it may be, but from the file structure, we can tell it's probably, with some type of certainty it is that. We also provide them with samples, the risk, but we'll work with that company to, usually from the data set that's in there, we use source material because, social media, right? Everybody says, usually we can find that person worked for that company and maybe is now there to help identify who probably is the person behind it. Mm-hmm. Or the company that is behind the leak itself. And then we have analysts that work with them on that. If they want to, they can subscribe to our remediation, where we'll take over the remediation if they want to, where we will act as a proxy for that company, contact that person, and attempt to get it secured, taken offline, whatever it may be that the company requests. But we only do that on the company's behalf if they request that at that point. And to be honest, most times, whether we're doing it or a client is doing it for themselves, the chance of successful is very, very high. It's over 98%, because sometimes most people don't realize. They're like, oh my, we had no idea we were that we thought we had that secured. Turned out we did not. So we go work with them on that behalf and go from there.
Yeah, it sounds like, as you mentioned, it's majority is not necessarily malicious, just misconfiguration and so on. So we're kind of getting to the top of the session here. So Todd, how can people reach you if they want to know more and maybe just take a look at CybelAngel?
Of course, you could always visit our website, CybelAngel.com, CybelAngel.com. That's with an L.
L.
Yeah, please do not go to the CybelAngel. Okay, it's with an L, please. You'll understand if you actually type it wrong. But you can always visit us there. You can find me on LinkedIn, Todd Carroll. I'm sure you can figure it out after listening to this with my background, which Todd Carroll it is. But you can, send me an invite or a message and be happy to have a discussion with you, or, tie in with some of our people here in the US, or if there's anybody listening that's, is outside of the U.S. They're like I said, we have offices in Paris, London, and New York. And like I said, I'm outside of Chicago, so we're kind of all over the U.S. right now during COVID, during this time.
Awesome, Todd. And it sounds like you have a fascinating background. So if anybody wants to reach out as well to ask your opinion about, the FBI and others, I mean, I'm sure you'll be totally willing to give back and provide some insight. And then I'm hoping things are going to open up, with the new normal, quote unquote, and you maybe get a chance to visit us in New York City for one of the monthly sessions that hopefully will come up online the next year. So again, much appreciated. And thanks for taking the time to chat with the group.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks all for joining today, and looking forward to seeing you in the next session. Stay safe, everyone. Take care. Thanks, Todd.
You're welcome.